Picture a massive two-story house with a private airstrip behind it and a boat bobbing on the waves near the ocean shore. In this dwelling lived the McIver family, two lovers in a tropical forest. They were preparing to become parents, but their dream was brutally shattered one dark night. Susan Michelle McIver was born on July 24, 1962, in Pennsylvania. From early childhood, everyone called her Missy. She was an incredibly kind, responsive person who adored spending time with young children. In all her games, she played the role of a mother or caregiver. Her affection for little ones grew into a desire to teach them important and useful things, so Missy decided to become a teacher. Due to her agreeable and peaceful nature, she was loved by both children and adults. She had a knack for explaining complex concepts in simple terms. People felt at ease in her presence, making teaching her true calling. After finishing high school, Missy enrolled at Florida International University to finally pursue her dream of becoming an educator. While living in Florida, she occasionally visited local bars with her friends to unwind and have fun. It was there that a young man named Tim noticed her. They met and chatted briefly before returning to their respective groups. Tim wasn't looking for a life partner, as he already had a girlfriend, but Missy managed to capture his attention somehow. Tim only remembered the attractive stranger a week later when he went to the same bar with his younger brother. Michael McIver was just over 20 years old. Despite his age, he was a determined, responsible person. He set goals for himself and persistently worked towards achieving them. At that point, Michael decided it was time to settle down, start a family, have children, and focus on building his own future. He shared this with his older brother Tim at the bar. The thing is, being engrossed in masculine pursuits, Michael was completely inexperienced in approaching girls and felt somewhat shy around them. It was then that Tim, Michael's older brother, recalled the lovely stranger he had met and exchanged a few words with at the bar just a week ago. He pictured her gentle, sweet gaze, endearing smile, and thought such a girl would be perfect for his modest brother. As if by magic, Missy entered the nightclub accompanied by a friend. Perhaps it was destiny, love at first sight. Tim hadn't even said a word yet, but Michael couldn't take his eyes off the girl of his dreams. The young people met, and after that, they were practically inseparable. They talked all night long, and just a few weeks after meeting, officially declared themselves a couple. They were two kindred spirits, seemingly destined from above to be together for life and die on the same day. Missy managed to bring out the best qualities in the modest young man, while Michael awakened and elevated her feminine appeal to a new level. Michael McIver was born on April 15, 1961, in Ohio. Besides him, the family had 3 other children, 2 brothers, Tim and James, and a sister, Sharon. As it happened, Michael's fate was linked to airplanes from birth, following in his parents' footsteps. His mother obtained a pilot's license at 16, which was quite rare at the time. Later, she worked as a flight attendant. Michael's father was an airline pilot, so the McIvers' entire life was closely tied to the sky. Naturally, the boys also became fascinated with planes. From childhood, they spent all their free time at the airfield, observing mechanics at work and studying aircraft structure. As he grew older, Michael, like his parents, made aviation his life's work. From age 13, he flew with his father and learned to operate a plane, and by 17, he could easily repair aircraft engines, devise new concepts, and experiment with airliner equipment. To supplement his practical skills with theory, Michael graduated from the University of Miami and became a professional pilot. He continued his parents' legacy, making aviation his profession. Over time, he also became the owner of an aircraft repair company. Michael was intelligent and enterprising. Not wanting to rest on his laurels, he decided that his future family should definitely live in paradise. He chose Key West, Florida as their residence, primarily because it was an ideal place to raise future children. In 1989, Michael and Missy relocated to their dream home in a small town called Tavernier. The 2-story house was magnificent. A spacious, glassed-in veranda encircled the building's perimeter at the second-floor level. But the dwelling's uniqueness lay in the private airstrip adjacent to it. Residents of this community could land their planes right behind their own homes. In addition, Michael and Missy owned a boat, so besides flying, they could enjoy water excursions, go diving, and fish. It was an ideal place to live, a tropical paradise with few inhabitants. In May 1990, Michael and Missy officially formalized their relationship. They had already achieved what they wanted, so they decided against a lavish wedding, instead holding the ceremony in their backyard with only their closest friends and family. In January of the following year, they learned exciting news. The young wife was pregnant. The couple had long dreamed of having children. They planned to have several sons and daughters, but the arrival of their firstborn was always the most thrilling event for expectant parents. Michael and Missy began preparing the nursery. They learned the baby's gender in advance. It was to be a boy. They even chose a name, Kyle Patrick McIver. Michael was 30, Missy 29. They were happy working at jobs they loved, had a splendid home, and the arrival of their son was set to elevate their relationship to an entirely new level. By then, Michael was thriving in his business, while Missy was a beloved elementary school teacher. The children adored her and eagerly rushed to class for her lessons. Soon, their home would be filled with a baby's cries. In their spare time, husband and wife painted walls themselves, bought furniture and toys for the nursery. The mother-to-be was very proud of the baby's bedroom, showing it off to all their guests. To finish everything before the child's birth, the couple hired a contractor for home renovations. Preparing for the baby's arrival was the most exciting time for Missy. She was already in her 8th month of pregnancy and in just a couple of weeks anticipated the arrival of little Kyle into this world. Unfortunately, their entire life, woven from love and happiness, would be brutally shattered in one night, and nothing they had planned would ever come to pass. On that fateful evening of August 21st, 1991, the McIver couple returned from a parenting class late, around 9 p.m. A powerful tropical storm had erupted. Michael and Missy managed to take shelter under their home's roof from the approaching rain driven by strong winds. Such natural phenomena are not uncommon in a tropical climate, so the storm only slightly dampened their clothes as husband and wife exited the car. The next morning, it was as if the hurricane had never happened. The sun shone, and the only reminders of the bad weather were scattered palm leaves and branches everywhere. Everything was proceeding as usual, except that Missy didn't show up for classes. The school administration tried to call the McIvers, but no one answered. Colleagues immediately became concerned, as Missy's due date was approaching, so anything could have happened. School staff called Michael's sister Sharon to find out where the couple had disappeared to, but she also didn't understand what was going on. Her brother hadn't called her, and none of the relatives knew where the husband and wife had gone. Sharon knew they couldn't have left without informing their loved ones, and she immediately had a bad feeling. Just in case, the woman called the police, asking them to check if everything was all right at her brother's house. Meanwhile, 2 of Missy's colleagues were already standing at the McIvers' front door, futilely trying to get the owner's attention. The doors were locked, and no one appeared in response to the knocking. The women decided to walk around the house and peer through the windows. Perhaps Missy had fallen ill and needed help, but instead of the pregnant woman, they glimpsed someone's legs through the living room window. Terrified, the school employees rushed to the nearest house and asked a neighbor for help. The man didn't wait for the police to arrive, kicking down the door. He hurried, hoping to provide necessary aid to the victim. But as soon as he glanced at Michael's body lying in the living room, and it was indeed him, the neighbor realized there was nothing he could do to help. The horrifying crime in a private gated community was shocking in itself, not to mention that it happened to the McIvers, a family adored by everyone in the area. Police arriving at the scene immediately called in a forensics team, as there was clear evidence of a crime. Officers methodically searched the large house, trying to note any clues. Not all rooms were inhabited. Some were still undergoing renovation. Paint cans stood everywhere with newspapers and building materials on the floor. The house itself was a 2-level structure with several entrances. The second-floor rooms could be accessed directly from outside via a glass-enclosed veranda, which had its own staircase. At first glance, there were no signs of struggle or forced entry in the house. Things were generally in their places, considering the ongoing renovations. The living room also seemed undisturbed. Sofa, TV, coffee table, and right behind the sofa lay the lifeless homeowner. It appeared he had been attacked as he was preparing for bed. The man wore a red and white striped undershirt, light shorts, and white socks. He was lying on his back, legs splayed. His eyes and mouth were covered with white socks and wrapped with painter's tape. The remaining roll of tape still lay on the coffee table, inches from Michael's body. Some blood had flowed from his nose, staining his shirt, and visible bruises marked his neck. It's possible he was deprived of oxygen, but the most horrifying detail was a footprint, not on the floor, but on Michael's throat. Missy McIver's body was found in the master bedroom. It lay on a cream-colored blanket thrown from the bed onto the floor. The woman was completely undressed. Her hands and feet were bound with clothesline and wrapped with painter's tape. Her fingers were clenched into fists, indicating severe pain before death. A black belt was wrapped several times around her neck, and her hair was tangled into a dense knot. Her eyes, like Michael's, were hastily covered with pieces of painter's tape. Under the blanket on which the homeowner lay, investigators found a nightgown with torn-out buttons and underwear cut into pieces by something sharp. Apparently, Missy had been sexually assaulted. In the bedroom, detectives found a .22 caliber pistol casing and a hole in the curtains. The sliding glass door leading to the terrace was open, and a fan was still running in the room. It was humid and hot. Phone cables in the house had been cut. The perpetrator had planned everything. During such bad weather, all the McIver's neighbors were indoors. Due to thunder, strong winds, and rain noise, no one heard any screams. The homeowners were prevented from seeking help by other means. Based on the initial examination, detectives surmised this was not a random burglar. The attack was clearly planned. But why was a couple expecting a child the main target? Who could they have crossed that the perpetrator didn't even spare an unborn baby? The metal rod wrapped in a towel found on the kitchen floor was among the pieces of evidence. In the bedroom dresser, investigators discovered clotheslines similar to that restraining Missy's hands and feet. This suggested the perpetrator used items found in the house rather than bringing them along. A notebook with torn-out pages was also among the evidence. It had previously contained alphabetically ordered addresses and phone numbers. This could indicate that the attack was committed by someone acquainted with the McIvers. Nothing was stolen. Jewelry boxes remained in place with all contents intact. Household appliances and the TV also didn't interest the criminal. However, a long ladder was leaning against the glass-enclosed veranda on the second floor outside. Most likely, the perpetrator climbed it to the second floor and entered one of the bedrooms through sliding doors. Outside, investigators found tire tracks and several footprints in the sand. Due to the recent storm, the sand was too wet to make a cast, so forensics limited themselves to photographing the print for future comparison with suspects' shoes. The contractor doing renovation work was first on this list. The long ladder belonged to him. He knew the layout of the rooms and could have seen where things were kept. However, before proceeding with the investigation, they had to inform the relatives already gathering at the McIver's house that Michael and Missy were dead. Sharon noticed from afar the yellow tape typically used to cordon off crime scenes stretched around her brother's house, and her heart sank. Her whole body went numb at once. On unsteady legs, she approached closer and saw the parents who had arrived before her. The horrific news instantly shattered the peaceful life of the gated community. No one wanted to believe it had really happened. Michael's parents, aged years in one morning, only knew that their son and daughter-in-law were no longer alive. This is what they told Sharon as she approached. Michael's sister couldn't understand how this was possible, as just a couple of days ago she had been in this house, seen the nursery, and discussed with Missy where to put things in their future son's room, and now none of them were alive. After Sharon, Michael's two brothers, James and Tim, arrived at the house. The most incredible coincidence was that August 22nd was Tim's birthday. The terrible surprise left by the criminal would now overshadow this once joyous occasion for the rest of his days. Tim had been so proud of introducing Michael and Missy, happy that everything was going well for them, and now he felt nothing but emotional pain. Meanwhile, the victims' bodies were sent to the medical examiner's office for autopsies. The saddest part was that not 2, but 3 people had died. Little Kyle Patrick McIver lived for about 30 minutes after Missy's death. He was quite viable, but it was not meant for him to enter this world. The cause of Michael's death was a blow to the head with a heavy object followed by strangulation. The assailant likely stunned the man with the metal rod wrapped in a towel when he came down to investigate a noise. Bruises on the homeowner's neck showed that a rope had been wrapped around it several times and pulled back with full force. He was conscious for a maximum of 10-15 seconds. Additionally, several vertebrae were broken. This occurred because the perpetrator stepped on Michael's throat with full force, which is why a boot print was left on his neck. Internal bleeding in the left shoulder and significant bruising in the abdominal area also indicated that Michael was struck not only on the head. External examination of Missy revealed ligature marks on her neck. The woman fought for her life and tried to loosen the rope, causing friction. Her agony lasted longer because she managed to delay her death. Either the criminal cut off her air supply and she lost consciousness, or when he loosened the rope, Missy regained consciousness. The lower part of her body was covered with small cuts. The expectant mother resisted as much as she could, not wanting to risk her baby's health. After the attack, she was left there to die alone. The pathologist was able to obtain DNA samples from seminal fluid left on Missy's body and on sheets in the McIver's house. This significantly facilitated identifying the perpetrator. However, another DNA sample was needed for comparison, as the police found no matches in their database. Detectives began compiling a list of potential suspects. First on it was the contractor performing construction work at the McIver's house. His surname began with a letter from the address book page that was missing. The worker was fully prepared to cooperate, but he was angered that some evidence pointed directly at him. Both Michael and Missy had become close to him. Therefore, the man was upset that he was suspected of attacking his friends. His boot prints were left in the sand near the house. He knew how to enter unnoticed, and it was his long ladder leaning against the terrace. Fortunately, he had an alibi. Additionally, the contractor agreed to provide a DNA sample, and it did not match the DNA found at the crime scene. Detectives learned that Missy had called her sister Marcia around 10:30 p.m., but she wasn't home. A message was left on the answering machine, with Missy promising to call back the next day. This provided investigators with a clue about the events of that terrible night. It appeared the McIvers were alive at 10:30 p.m. The storm began around 5 p.m. and continued until midnight, intensifying each hour. The hurricane peaked in the second half of the night. Phone lines were cut shortly after Missy's call to her sister. Relatives also informed detectives that Missy had been married before Michael. Since the crime seemed very personal and largely directed against the woman, police decided to question the ex-husband living in Miami. Due to extensive media coverage of the McIver family tragedy investigation, it was known in other states. A doctor who knew Missy's former husband called the police. He reported that the man was unhappy about the divorce and genuinely upset upon hearing Missy had remarried and was pregnant. Apparently, he still had some attachment to his first wife. Investigators now focused on gathering more information about this person and discovered he had a criminal record for petty theft. In the absence of other suspects, the ex-husband seemed an ideal fit for the perpetrator. He could have become enraged and committed the crime. During questioning, the man denied everything, insisting he had no connection to the attack on Missy and Michael. He also had an alibi for that night. He was in Miami and couldn't have been near the McIver's house. The former husband was genuinely shocked when he learned of his first wife's death. He willingly provided a DNA sample, which showed no match. The investigation again reached a dead end. The Tavernier community, accustomed to living safely, began locking doors, buying weapons for protection, and installing home security systems. People feared the criminal might live nearby and didn't want to share the McIver family's fate. Despite residents' pressure on authorities, the investigation stalled. Almost a year passed. Investigators checked all possible leads, questioned several more suspects, but DNA results didn't match. They had to start over. It was then that detectives decided to delve deeper into Michael McIver's professional activities. Perhaps the businessman was actually the perpetrator's potential target. Detectives learned that Michael spent much time traveling the world as a pilot. Relatives working in the aviation industry shared suspicions that Michael might have been involuntarily involved in a dangerous and illegal scheme. The private airstrip behind the house could have attracted people engaged in transporting illegal substances. Michael, dreaming of a tropical paradise for his family, might have been forcibly drawn into smuggling. He had always dreamed of earning big money, and this could have brought him financial stability. But something went wrong, and Michael was killed. Alternatively, he might have refused to participate, paying with his life and the lives of those he loved most. Investigators now questioned whether McIver's business was somehow linked to illegal activities. Could aircraft repair be just a cover for something much more serious? The day before the incident, Michael's brother James had given him all his savings to buy a plane in Belize at an excellent price. Michael went there to make the deal. This transaction was legal. The plane, seized from drug dealers, was being sold by the police department through an auction. All this hype, supplemented by inaccurate assumptions from reporters, caused a wave of condemnation of Michael's actions. Although it later turned out that the deal was legal and McIver was in no way connected to smuggling, the family, already in mourning, received a considerable amount of negative attention. Their son's reputation was tarnished without any objective evidence. Losing Michael along with his wife and unborn child was a terrible tragedy, and portraying him as a smuggler was beyond the pale. Investigators spent a lot of time developing this theory, but it all turned out to be empty speculation, unsupported by any objective evidence.
Instead of abandoning this theory, detectives decided to investigate the activities of Michael's brother James. What if he was involved in transporting illegal substances, and Michael was blackmailing him? When James McIver noticed he was being followed, he came to the police station and simply provided a DNA sample to put an end to all these rumors about illegal business. Naturally, no matches were found, and the
Family was left alone, with investigators deciding to look elsewhere. Detectives spent 2 years investigating the illegal drug trafficking angle and were now completely at a loss. They decided to involve the FBI. A criminal profile was created, which differed significantly from all previous suspects. A crucial factor was what this person did to a woman who was 8 months pregnant. Not everyone is capable of such a heartless crime. It requires a certain personality type. The profiler suggested that the perpetrator was obsessed with Missy. He likely had previous experience with home invasions, knowing what actions to take. Michael's presence at home didn't concern him at all. He was determined to get to Missy at any cost. The criminal had been observing the woman, knew her daily routine and the layout of the house. The FBI concluded that this man was a local resident who might have crossed paths with Missy during the day. Therefore, they began looking for someone with a criminal past who had some contact with the deceased woman. In the final months of her pregnancy, Missy visited the same places: grocery store, hospital, gas station, and the school where she continued teaching. She spent most of her time at home preparing for the baby's arrival. Police began investigating the identities of employees at places Missy McIver frequented most in recent months, paying special attention to those with criminal backgrounds, including burglary or violent crimes. Detectives also spoke with relatives, and Sharon remembered Missy casually mentioning a guy at the local gas station who tried to hit on her despite her pregnancy. This gas station was the closest to the McIvers' home. Missy passed by it every morning and stopped for coffee on her way to work. Investigators revisited evidence found at the crime scene and noticed several gas station receipts among them. Finally, the police had another potential suspect. This man was named Thomas Mitchell Overton. He was allegedly involved in several burglaries and was linked to an attack on a 20-year-old girl that ended in her death. The crime, committed in May 1990, remained unsolved. Rachel Surette, the girl's name, was last seen when her father dropped her off at a local cinema in Tavernier. 2 weeks later, tourists stumbled upon her body wrapped in a tarp in the woods. She had previously told her father about a guy working at the cinema who constantly harassed her. The most shocking part was that Thomas Overton once worked at this place. He was under suspicion, but no evidence of his involvement in the girl's death was found. Rachel and Missy looked somewhat similar, and both women openly rejected Thomas's advances, further strengthening investigators' suspicions. However, the problem was that detectives couldn't simply ask the man to provide a DNA sample without legal grounds, and 36-year-old Thomas Overton was unlikely to voluntarily incriminate himself. So the police decided to wait until the suspect committed another crime. 6 months later, an officer spotted an oddly dressed individual cycling at 3 a.m. The policeman checked the person's ID, revealing him to be Thomas Overton. Approximately 15 minutes after, the station received a call from a young woman reporting an intruder in her home. The perpetrator had fled, but left a lipstick message on the bathroom mirror, threatening to end the homeowner's life next time. Subsequently, another incident occurred where Thomas was actually arrested for trespassing, but as it wasn't a felony, they had to release him. Law enforcement continued surveillance, albeit with less fervor than before. No new developments in the McIver family case emerged until 1996. 5 years had passed since the couple's demise when a close associate of Thomas, a criminal seeking to become an informant to clear his own charges, aided the investigation. He notified the police that Thomas was planning another robbery, providing the house address and timing of the intended crime. Officers set up an ambush, enabling them to apprehend Thomas as he was cutting phone lines. A firearm was found on him. As a convicted felon in Florida was prohibited from possessing a gun, this served as an additional grounds for his arrest. On October 6, 1996, Thomas Mitchell Overton was apprehended on charges of burglary. Investigators hoped to obtain a DNA sample, but the suspect refused to provide it voluntarily. Acquiring a warrant would have taken several months, and Thomas seemingly anticipated the consequences for him. At one point, while still in custody, the man attempted to harm himself by deliberately slashing his throat with a disposable razor. He intended to be taken to the hospital and make an escape. From the towels used to stanch the injured man's bleeding, a DNA sample was collected. In November 1996, Thomas's DNA was compared to the DNA found on a bedding sample from the McIver residence. The blood matched. On October 17, 1998, 2 years after his arrest, Thomas Overton's trial commenced. DNA evidence was presented in court along with testimony from 2 witnesses, fellow inmates who had shared a cell with the suspect at different times. One of them claimed Thomas admitted to committing burglaries in an affluent area of the Florida Keys and taking someone's life. He also shared his usual security measures for burglaries: cutting phone lines, wearing gloves, carrying a gun and knife, and using disguises. To another inmate, Thomas Overton allegedly said the best time for robbery was during power outages or bad weather. He then told an implausible story, insisting that Missy McIver behaved erratically at a gas station when encountering him. Some days she was pleasant, smiling, and even flirting, while other days she acted like a witch. After glimpsing Missy's address on a gas receipt, Thomas began observing the McIver home. On August 21, 1991, the criminal decided to execute his terrible plan. He cut the phone lines and placed a ladder against the balcony. This action made some noise, and lights came on in the house. After waiting for quiet, he climbed the ladder and entered through a guest bedroom. While examining the premises, he heard Michael, the homeowner, wake up and go to the kitchen refrigerator. Thomas panicked and stealthily approached from behind, striking the man's head with an iron rod found in one of the rooms. Michael didn't immediately lose consciousness, so the intruder punched him several times to knock him out. At that moment, he noticed Missy, who had witnessed everything. The lady of the house tried to hide in the bedroom, According to Thomas, he caught up with her and bound her with items from a dresser, then attempted to persuade her to cooperate, but Missy said she knew who he was. Meanwhile, the perpetrator worried Michael might regain consciousness. He returned to the living room, covered the unconscious man's eyes with socks, and wrapped his head with masking tape. Thomas couldn't resist taking advantage of Missy's helplessness, having been attracted to her earlier at the gas station. He violated her, then tightened a rope around the woman's neck and took her life, planning to leave no witnesses. Afterwards, the criminal returned to the living room and ended Michael McIver's life. In his conversations with other inmates, Thomas claimed he knew nothing about a bullet hole in the curtains, and that he deliberately tore pages from a notebook to confuse investigators. He then confessed that his goal wasn't robbery, but to obtain Missy's body. On March 18, 1999, 8 years after the attack on the McIver family, 41-year-old Thomas Overton was found guilty and sentenced to death for the slaughter of 3 people, including the unborn Kyle Patrick McIver. After the sentence was announced, Thomas turned to face the crowd and smiled. He mockingly waved at Michael's sister Sharon, suggesting he'd gladly do the same to her. Michael's parents couldn't bear the heavy loss. Soon after the case concluded, they passed away one after another, following their son. Thomas Overton, who robbed an entire family of their future, still remains on death row awaiting execution, feeling quite content with himself. Evil wears many masks, and the most dangerous is the mask of virtue. The power of evil lies in its ability to conceal itself. Gina had the potential to become a famous movie star in the future, but fate had different plans. One day, the young woman simply vanished without a trace. She disappeared just a few feet away from reaching her home. In the summer of 2006, 14-year-old Georgina Kruger relocated with her family to Stendelstrasse in Berlin. The girl's parents had divorced a couple of years earlier. Her mother's name was Vesna, and her younger sister was Michelle. Georgina also had an older brother named Tommy, who was 22 at the time and lived separately. Being new to the class, Gina, as she was more often called at home, had virtually no friends. Her female classmates disliked the fact that Gina's arrival caused a stir among the boys, although Gina herself was unaware of how many teenagers found her attractive. Suddenly becoming popular among the male half of the class, the girl provoked a negative reaction from the girls. They were simply jealous of her and were in no hurry to accept her into their group. In reality, Georgina paid a lot of attention to her appearance. She always dressed fashionably, enjoyed wearing makeup, and took care of herself. She dreamed of becoming an actress, but also considered modeling. Gina often danced in front of the mirror, tried out different looks, and imagined herself in the spotlight on a big stage. The girl adored Indian films the most. While watching the actors on the TV screen, she mimicked their movements and tried to sing along with them. On Friday, September 22, 2006, her dream was supposed to come true because Georgina received an offer to play a small role in the film Turkish for Beginners. They promised to call her after the weekend. On Monday, September 25th, the casting agency was supposed to contact the schoolgirl to inform her of their decision. The filming was scheduled for the next autumn holidays. Gina had everything planned out and was eagerly awaiting the start of the week to answer the call and receive the coveted agreement for a small role in the project. It was what she had long dreamed of. Saturday and Sunday seemed endless to the girl. On Monday, September 25th, 2006, Gina somehow sat through her lessons and rushed home after school. She would not miss the call from the agency for anything, but unfortunately, things did not go at all as the high school student expected. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. After leaving school, Georgina, as usual, hurried to the public transport stop, boarded the #27 bus, and headed home. She needed to ride for a few stops and then walk just 600 feet to find herself in front of the front door. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the high school student was seen getting off the bus. Her grandmother and younger sister Michelle were at home. They had already prepared lunch. They were just waiting for Gina to sit down at the table together. But the girl never arrived home. At 2 o'clock, the grandmother tried to contact her granddaughter on her mobile phone, but she didn't answer. The woman was worried. Anything could have happened. Perhaps Gina missed the bus or met someone she knew and got caught up in conversation. In any case, she should have appeared any minute. However, time passed, and the schoolgirl still wasn't there. The grandmother tried to dial her granddaughter's number again to hurry her up, but the call immediately went to voicemail. Then the woman decided to call the school to find out if anything unusual had happened. Maybe Georgina had skipped classes altogether. The school reassured her and said that the girl had attended all the lessons and had gone home after they ended. The teacher noticed that Gina had been a little distracted that day, but her grandmother knew the reason. Her granddaughter was waiting for a call from the casting agency and could not believe her own luck. The elderly woman began to worry more and more with each passing hour. She waited until Georgina's mother came home and told her what had happened. Vesna immediately had a bad feeling. Such behavior was uncharacteristic of her eldest daughter. Gina was always punctual, kept her agreements, and would never have been so late without notifying her loved ones. Moreover, she would never have turned off her mobile phone. The women immediately dialed the police station and reported the schoolgirl's disappearance. At first, the officers went through all the possible scenarios. Could Kruger have run away from home? Was there a serious quarrel with family or friends? Was Gina dating a boy, and could she have done something foolish due to teenage love? Or maybe there was some conflict at school, and the upset girl was just hiding somewhere. But it was important to remember that on that day, Gina was supposed to receive a call from the agency about her role in the film Turkish for Beginners, and she would not have missed that call for anything in the world, considering that she had been talking about it all weekend. The police recorded what the girl was wearing when she was last seen and compiled a description. Georgina was approximately 5 feet 5 inches tall, had long, straight hair, and was dressed in light blue jeans with scuffs, brown-heeled ankle boots, and a white denim jacket. She had a long, strapped pink school bag with her and a mobile phone, which was later found to be turned off. Detectives traced the location of the schoolgirl's cell phone through cell towers and discovered that at 2:06 p.m., the device was pinged on Stendelstrasse, and at 2:08 p.m., it was already switched off. It was unlikely that Georgina, being practically at home at some point, decided to turn around, especially since she was expecting a very important call from the agency that day about the role. She was seen getting off bus #27, which definitely proved that the girl was very close to home, at least within a few minutes' walk. A large search operation was launched on the street where the Kruger family lived. All nearby attics and basements were checked. The police even used dogs trained to detect human remains. Investigators questioned local residents and Gina's classmates. They checked several dozen criminals who were out on bail or had recently been released from prison. The Kruger family handed out leaflets with a photograph of the schoolgirl. Posters with a description of the missing girl were also posted throughout the district. Vesna herself went around to the neighbors and tried to find out any information about her daughter. However, all the efforts of the investigators and the family did not move the case forward and did not yield any results. Georgina seemed to have vanished into thin air just 300 feet from her home. Weeks and months passed, and 3 years after the girl disappeared in broad daylight, a second search operation was organized. This time, the police again used search dogs capable of finding not only human remains, but also living people. The service dogs began their search from the bus stop, but they led the investigators not to the Kruger's house but to the suburbs. The police searched the wooded area but found no evidence that the girl had ever been there, which was not surprising since hoping that the dogs would pick up a scent after 3 years was pointless. The repeated search operation also did not provide any leads in the case. It did not move forward. There was a feeling that they were looking for a needle in a haystack, but this was not a needle, but a real teenage girl, and she could not have vanished without a trace. Many years later, in 2016, another search was conducted. It seemed that it would yield at least some results. The residents of Stendelstrasse, where the Kruger family lived, were checked and questioned again, and there was a small breakthrough in the case. According to neighbors, a 30-year-old unemployed man lived in their area. He could stand on the porch for hours, looking at passing teenagers. He clearly enjoyed watching them. The man was often seen chatting with young girls, the same age as the missing Gina. Sometimes he would say all sorts of obscenities to them and ask provocative questions, like whether they had ever slept with boys. At the same time, he hinted that he could help them figure out this intimate issue. To win over the high school girls, he often understated his age and tried to appear younger than he actually was. The schoolgirls were not afraid of him but tried to avoid him, considering him strange and very intrusive. It was this strangeness that made the neighbors pay attention to him. So who was this person? The man living next door to the Kruger family was named Ali Ka. He was the father of 3 children and lived with them and his wife Melek in an apartment at 3 Stendelstrasse. Ali, who grew up in the Middle East, was unemployed and stayed afloat by taking odd jobs and receiving social benefits. He had a lot of debts and constantly had problems with money because he lived beyond his means. His passion, apart from young girls, was expensive and fashionable cars, which he could only dream of. In his free time, the man often visited a Turkish cafe located on the first floor of his apartment building. There he met with friends and acquaintances, although in reality, Ali had no close friends. For the most part, he communicated with random people who happened to be nearby. The investigators paid attention not only to the neighbor's testimony about the man's strange behavior, but also to his previous criminal record. In 2011, he committed a violent crime by luring a 17-year-old neighbor into his basement. The girl, after walking with her friend, went home, and Ali was standing on the porch of house number 3. He called out to the schoolgirl and offered to buy her a mobile phone. The high school student was interested in the lucrative offer. After hesitating and being persuaded, she followed Ali into the basement, where the gadget supposedly lay. Naturally, there was no phone there. Instead, Ali said that he had been in love with the girl for a long time and was even ready to leave his wife just to be with her. After the confession, the man tried to kiss her, but the schoolgirl sharply refused, for which she received a blow to the back of the head. When her exhausted body slid down, Ali sat on top of her. Despite attempts to scream and resist, the girl could not resist the adult man. When it was over, Ali stood up and handed the captive a handkerchief to wipe away her tears. The rapist threatened her to keep her mouth shut and not dare to tell anyone what had happened, not her family, friends, or especially the police. The girl nodded obediently, but in reality, she was just waiting for the moment when she would escape from the basement. Once outside, she went straight to the police station and told everything, pointing her finger at Ali. The high school student also described the basement room in great detail and named some details confirming the authenticity of the story. According to her, it was more like a small room where the owner spent his free time than a storeroom with unnecessary things. Ali was charged with assaulting a 17-year-old girl. In 2012, he received 1.5 years probation for abusing a minor combined with bodily harm. According to the accused, the girl herself asked him to use a mobile phone. When he went to the basement, she followed him. After examining the gadget, the high school student stated that she had no money with her, but she could pay in another way, to which Ali categorically refused, as he had a family and his own children. He would never have risked the well-being of his loved ones. Apparently, this did not stop the girl, and she tried to hug the man, for which she received a slap on the back of the head. The humiliated and angry schoolgirl began to shout that she would ruin Ali's family by telling his wife and children everything. She could not calm down and was showering him with threats, promising to ruin his life. It even seemed to the man that the girl had some kind of harmful addiction because her mood changed too quickly. Ali's family fully supported him and assured that the schoolgirl had long shown interest in an adult man and had repeatedly tried to flirt with him. After he rejected her, She decided to take revenge in this way, claiming that he had forced her to have sexual intercourse. This whole story with the 17-year-old girl largely coincided with the situation of Georgina. The schoolgirl was also returning home after classes and disappeared in the same area where Ali had attacked another high school student. According to the mobile phone data, Gina disappeared in the area between the bus stop and her house number 8 on Stendelstrasse. Ali also lived there in house number 3. The girl would have had to pass by his front door in any case. Could this person have somehow intercepted the schoolgirl? The problem was that the search dogs showed no interest in the basement of Ali's house. The detectives had no specific evidence, no witness statements, no DNA, nothing that could be presented to the suspect. The only coincidence was that on the day of the disappearance, Georgina and Ali's mobile phones were pinged in the same area. This could indicate that they were together, but it could also mean that they simply lived on the same street, and that's all. Interrogating the man would also be pointless. If the police have nothing to present, he will simply say that he had nothing to do with Gina's disappearance. The authorities decided to apply a rather unusual strategy. To begin with, they simply monitored Ali's phone calls. The surveillance continued for several weeks. Investigators learned that the man had money problems. He was gambling and owed a fairly large sum, at least 10,000 euros. The police decided to play on this. They were facing a long-term and very costly operation to introduce agents into the close circle of the suspect's family. They simply had no other options to get closer to the case of the missing girl. An undercover police officer named Håkan was sent on the case. This was his code name. He was supposed to enter the circle of Ali's trusted people to try to find out information about the disappearance of Georgina Kruger. The undercover agent was supposed to appear before the suspect in the role of a successful businessman who had come to Berlin to open a car wash. He appeared in the cafe located on the first floor of the apartment building where Ali lived and managed to establish contact with the suspect. It was assumed that the operation would be quite lengthy in order not to arouse any suspicion on Ali's part. Håkan became acquainted with the regulars of the Turkish cafe and told them the story of his car wash business, which he planned to open in the area. He needed a manager with a good salary. Ali, who had no way to pay off his accumulated debts, became interested in the opening prospects. Soon, he and Håkan became inseparable. Once they traveled together on business to Frankfurt. Thanks to this trip, the men began to trust each other even more. Ali already really imagined how his life would change after getting a job at the car wash as a manager. He and Håkan began to meet in private as well. However, Ali was in no hurry to share his sins with his new friend. On the contrary, he wanted to appear in the eyes of the businessman as a decent and worthy person so as not to miss out on the high-paying position. If everything worked out, all his financial problems would be solved, and Ali could finally buy the car of his dreams and live the life he always wanted. Everything was going according to plan. However, the authorities had not made any progress in Gina's case, so they decided to introduce another undercover agent, codenamed Susie, into the operation. According to the cover story, she was Håkan's girlfriend. Her objective was to get close to Ali's family and attempt to extract information from his wife, Melik. Over time, Melik and Susie indeed became best friends. The two couples frequently spent time together, celebrating holidays and going on vacations. Håkan and Susie brought toys for Ali's children and occasionally babysat them, but the case of Georgina remained at a standstill. No evidence, even indirect, linking Ali to the girl's disappearance could be found. Moreover, the undercover agents aroused suspicion in Ali's sister, who believed that these individuals had not entered her brother's life by chance. For some reason, she was somewhat skeptical of them, sensing that something was amiss. The woman even noticed that Susie and Håkan did not seem like a couple in love. If Ali had listened to his sister, everything might have turned out differently. But he had grown so accustomed to the role of a successful manager of a future business that he refused to listen to anyone. When the investigators realized that the man had no intention of tarnishing his reputation in front of his future employer, they decided to introduce another agent into the case, Håkan's cousin Kor, who had a criminal past. According to the cover story, He was a slippery character capable of committing crimes and possessed rather dubious proclivities. The authorities hoped that by acquainting himself with someone willing to break the law, Ali would be more forthcoming. In the absence of any physical evidence, they could only hope for the criminal's own confession. The investigators were prepared to invest a great deal of effort and time to obtain this from Ali. Kaur and Ali quickly found common ground. It all began when the two men visited a brothel together. Ali, who had never cheated on his wife and strived to maintain this image in front of others, easily abandoned his principles the moment a young girl appeared on the horizon. Moreover, Kaur paid for the pleasure out of his own pocket. The secret undercover agent explained to Ali that the money was obtained illegally, which was why he easily squandered it. Thus, they managed to see the suspect from two sides: as an exemplary family man who wanted to work for the sake of the future, and as a jovial reveler for whom his wife and children were not an obstacle when it came to pleasure. To ensure the credibility of the entire operation, the investigators had to rent a plot of land for the future car wash and sign a fictitious contract with Ali. Now, all hope rested on Kaur. If he failed to engage the suspect in conversation, then Georgina's case could be safely filed away as unsolved. However, in 2018, something unexpected occurred. An unknown man called the police and stated that while he was not the perpetrator, he knew the location of the missing Georgina Kruger's body. The stranger provided coordinates where they should search for the high school student's remains, and then hung up. Tracing the call proved unsuccessful, but a team of specialists was urgently dispatched to the specified location. The coordinates led to the Brizzy-Langer forest. The area was combed through thoroughly, but no traces of the girl were found. It remains unknown whether this call was someone's foolish prank or if someone wanted to further confuse the investigation. Unfortunately, the witness who led the detectives on a false trail could not be located. However, new leaflets were created for the Georgina Kruger case. They featured a special QR code that, when scanned, allowed one to hear the caller's voice. The authorities hoped that this method would enable someone to recognize the anonymous witness's voice, and at the same time, they wanted to use these flyers to lure Ali into a trap. They were curious to see how the suspect would react upon learning that someone had called the police regarding the high school student's whereabouts. The detectives took advantage of Ali's passion for fast and expensive cars and rented his favorite Porsche model. The vehicle was equipped with a listening device, and a leaflet with Gina's photo and a QR code was placed on the back seat. Through their undercover agents, they allowed Ali and his wife Melek to take a ride in this car, hoping that a conversation about the girl's disappearance would arise between them. Initially, Ali and Melek did not notice the leaflet, but at some point, it caught their eye. The woman reacted very indifferently, merely expressing surprise that someone had called the police so many years after Georgina's disappearance. This was a normal reaction for someone not involved in the crime. However, Ali noticeably became nervous. He tried to speculate about who the caller might have been and what information this witness could possess. Additionally, Ali took the leaflet with him to a Turkish coffee shop and began showing it to his friends in an attempt to find out if they knew anything about the case. Later, he explained this interest by saying that he wanted to help the police. The investigators, on the other hand, wondered why a person with no connection to the disappearance would suddenly, after years, feel the need to gather information. Ali's actions only convinced the authorities that they were on the right track and needed to keep pursuing him. As for Melek, his wife, the detectives concluded that she knew nothing about her husband's actions and did not even suspect that he could be involved, which explained her lack of interest in the old case. The investigators were almost certain that Ali had kept the crime a secret from her. The detectives' further strategy was to utilize the friendly relationship that had developed between Ali and the undercover agent Kaur for the benefit of the investigation. One day, Kaur told Ali about his girlfriend and the problems she was causing him. They often argued. The thing was that Kaur had supposedly wanted to break up with her for a long time, but couldn't do so for a rather delicate reason. His girlfriend was blackmailing him. Opening up, he shared his story with Ali. At some point in the past, The man had taken someone's life and foolishly confessed this to his girlfriend. No one knew about this except the two of them. Even his cousin Håkon was unaware. At some point, they had forgotten about the incident. But as soon as Kåre mentioned breaking up, the girl threatened to go to the police and tell them everything. The man no longer knew how to extricate himself from this situation. He didn't want to go to prison and didn't want to remain under the blackmailer's thumb. So, he asked Ali for advice on what he would do in a similar case. Ali sympathized, but this did not bring the team any closer to investigating Georgina's disappearance. The investigators hoped that sooner or later he would see Kåre as an ally and become more forthcoming with him. The men continued to regularly discuss Kåre's relationship problems. Ali suggested various solutions without uttering a word about his past transgressions. Kåre decided to accelerate the process, and one day made a €150,000 offer. He was ready to remove his girlfriend from his path by any means possible, even if it was illegal. The detectives knew that Ali was in desperate need of money since he had not yet started his job as the car wash manager. And the sum of €150,000 could pay off all his debts and allow him to change his life for the better, solving a host of other financial problems. Of course, Ali could not miss such an opportunity. He offered to rid Kåre of the blackmailer himself. He was eager to get the money, so he devised various scenarios on how best to carry out the job. The perpetrator clarified details such as the girl's weight, whether he would need a car, and where best to attack her. Ali was considering options for the crime, and the trap was about to snap shut. But the goal of investigating Georgina's case still had not been achieved. The detectives were fortunate that one day, while Ali and Kåre were riding in a car together, a conversation took place between them that was recorded. Ali was again going over options for completing the task and how he could carry it out. He mentioned that he had even searched the internet for information on how best to dispose of a lifeless body. The undercover agent was stalling for time and allowing Ali to independently reason about the dangerous topic. He did not push him in any direction to avoid later being accused of incitement. After listening to Ali's thoughts, Kåre told him that he did not believe Ali could take a person's life, even for a large sum of money. And that's when what the investigators had been waiting for over several months occurred. Ali and Kåre discussed all the possible consequences of the crime and how the perpetrator himself imagined it. To confirm his readiness and convince his friend of his determination, Ali shared a story from his life, and it was the story of Georgina Kruger's disappearance. According to Ali, this girl was amazing. Every day at the same time on her way to and from school, she would pass by Ali's front door, heading to the bus stop. The man knew her approximate schedule, so he went outside every day just to see her. He wanted to get to know her better at all costs. On Monday, September 25th, 2006, Ali was standing at the entrance as usual when Gina got off the bus and headed towards her house in high spirits. That day, the girl was incredibly beautiful. Her eyes sparkled in a special way, and she was literally glowing with happiness. Ali approached the high school student with a request for help. He needed to carry several bags down to the basement. He even offered to pay the girl for the service. Gina, who often saw her neighbor with his children and family, had no idea how her assistance would end. In the basement of Ali's house were storage rooms. The man had turned a closet into a kind of room. As soon as the girl was inside, he hit her on the head. Georgina screamed in pain, and to somehow calm her down and make her be quiet, he struck her again with greater force. Gina lost consciousness and collapsed on the floor. Ali then told Kåre in great detail what happened next. He regretted his actions, but realized that if he let Georgina out of the basement, he would again face prison time. He simply squeezed her neck with his hands and did not let go until Gina stopped breathing. Ali recounted the story of the terrible assault in such detail that he even mentioned how his knuckles later ached from the intense strain. His narration was very vivid and credible, with many details that would be impossible to make up if he had simply wanted to brag. After Georgina died, Ali hid her in his basement room for 3 days. then wrapped the body in an old carpet and simply threw it in the trash. Of course, the detectives checked this. They investigated the entire waste disposal process and learned that all the garbage is incinerated. So Gina Kruger's remains were completely destroyed, but Ali's confession was enough to make an arrest. They came for him in December 2018, 12 years after Gina's disappearance. Ali was at home with his daughter. All the premises belonging to his family were searched, but nothing linking him to the missing girl was found. During the interrogation, the man did not say a word. He remained silent when he was charged and later kept silent in court. Ali was in custody for a year and a half. He and his family were completely confident in an acquittal, as there was no real evidence against him. No DNA, no body, no witnesses, nothing but his confession. The prosecution team compared Ali's previous conviction with what he had told the undercover agent Kaur, and much of it matched. It was the modus operandi of a single criminal. Nevertheless, it was Ali's detailed account of the events of that day that convinced the jury and the judge that this man was guilty of the death of 14-year-old Georgina Kruger, a girl who might have been destined for world fame in the movie industry. Gina's mother, Vesna Kruger, had hoped all this time that her daughter had simply run away from home. The woman didn't even entertain the thought that the girl was no longer alive. After all, there was no evidence that she had been attacked and abducted in broad daylight. The news of the neighbor's arrest and his subsequent conviction broke the mother's heart. Somewhere deep down, she wished the accusation was a mistake. After all, it would have rekindled her hope that someday she would meet her Gina. On March 17, 2020, Ali was sentenced to life imprisonment. Subsequently, he claimed that he was a victim in this case. He had agreed to act as a hitman for Kaur's girlfriend only to save her and get her out of harm's way. In fact, he intended to go to the police and expose Kaur's plan. Lawyers advised Ali to remain silent in court, so he was unable to tell his own version of events. The man still insists that he had nothing to do with Georgina Kruger's disappearance. However, the confession speaks for itself. Surprisingly, Ali's family also believes that he was wrongfully convicted. The police simply spent a lot of time and money trying to expose him, and to somehow justify the expenses, they pinned the crime on him. Only one man knows the whole truth, and now behind bars, perhaps one day his conscience will overcome him, and he will admit to the evil he has done. This incident occurred in 2013 in Bakersfield, California. Todd Eric Chance was born on March 10, 1968, to Diana and Travis Chance. Shortly after, his younger brother Scott came along. They all resided on a farm in the small town of Shafter, not far from Bakersfield. Both boys weren't afraid of hard work and helped their parents raise pigs and horses from a young age. Todd was described as a true cowboy. From his youth, he adored wearing a cowboy hat and boots, enjoyed off-road riding with his father, and was passionate about race cars. When the young man became old enough to drive, his parents gifted him a blue Mustang Cobra, and he transformed into a handsome young cowboy with his own iron steed. As a result, he never lacked female attention. His mother Diana said he was a real magnet for girls. Every day, notes would appear on his car's windshield from some love-struck admirer leaving her phone number with a request to call. Young ladies were attracted to his sports car and to him, but lately there was only one woman who captured Todd's imagination. Her name was Jenny. Jenny worked as a cashier at a local pharmacy. This young woman had already been married to her high school sweetheart, but their married life was short-lived as her spouse began to stray. They divorced due to his constant infidelity. Consequently, Jenny became a single mother to a little daughter. She believed that if she ever married again, she would choose an unattractive, overweight man who would cherish her as a woman. These were the thoughts in the divorced lady's mind when an attractive young man named Todd Chance, who had recently finished high school, started working as a security guard at their pharmacy. Jenny immediately noticed him, but considered Todd a ladies' man and a player with women's hearts, so she tried to keep him at arm's length. It wasn't long before the woman changed her opinion about Todd, getting to know him better. He turned out to be quite different from how she had imagined him. Todd wasn't a womanizer. He genuinely fell in love with Jenny and accepted her daughter Jessica as his own. The gentle, caring man managed to melt the single mother's heart, making her feel worthy of happiness again. From this point, their relationship developed very quickly. Eventually, Jenny and Todd married in 1996. They had 2 more daughters, Samantha and Sarah. Despite her successful marriage, Jenny didn't plan to spend her entire life as a cashier. In addition to the pharmacy, the woman managed to juggle 2 more jobs. She dreamed of earning a degree in education and did everything to pay for college tuition. Since Todd's childhood love extended to all vehicles, be it sports cars, passenger cars, or motorcycles, he got a job as a truck driver and focused on setting up their family home while his wife finished her teaching studies. Friends, over 90% of viewers watch videos without subscribing to the channel. Check if you're subscribed. If not, please be so kind as to subscribe to the channel to support me. After obtaining her coveted certificate, Jenny began working as an administrator at Fairview Elementary School. She was extremely hardworking and always strived to achieve her set goals. Mrs. Chance was determined to accomplish something in this life, even if it meant juggling 3 jobs. Having come a long way in her career, starting from school secretary and ending up as an assistant manager, Jenny eventually became the principal of Fairview Elementary School. And Todd, who had a passion for cars since childhood, made a career working in the trucking industry for over 15 years. Now that Jenny's income as a school principal had increased, the family could afford luxurious vacations and provide their daughters with an excellent life. Todd was the best husband and father one could dream of. He had always been hardworking, but his family became his main priority. The man spent all his free time with the girls, played video games, engaged in sports, and tried to support all their endeavors. Jessica, Jenny's daughter from her first marriage, considered Todd her father. He was always there for her, which was something she didn't get from her biological father. By the summer of 2013, Jessica had moved out of the family home, having settled her personal life, while Samantha and Sarah were teenagers at the time. The whole family decided to go on a family vacation to San Francisco and Las Vegas, and they had a great time. The girls called it the best summer ever, and just a few weeks after returning from vacation, Todd Chance was found dead. On August 25, 2013, at 9:27 a.m., the police received a call to the Almond Grove, located 15 miles from Bakersfield, where local workers had discovered a body. According to them, at 7:30 a.m., they had driven through the area and there was no body there. Consequently, the corpse must have been dumped after 7:30. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, they were able to immediately identify the deceased as 45-year-old Todd Chance because he had a wallet with identification documents on him. His mobile phone was lying 39 feet away from the body. Nearby, there were also tire tracks imprinted, but the vehicle itself was missing. The man had been shot twice in the chest, with one of the bullets passing through his right arm. Both shots were fired at close range, and the fact that one of them pierced his arm indicated Todd's attempt to defend himself. The investigation began almost immediately. Detectives wanted to figure out how this happened and why someone would want to take Todd's life. Robbery was ruled out, as the wallet found in his pocket and the nearby mobile phone suggested that the perpetrator had little interest in cash. However, Todd's pride and joy, his black 2011 Mustang, was nowhere to be found. The police theorized that the man might have fallen victim to a carjacking. Perhaps someone had coveted his vehicle. Detectives began searching for the vehicle in the Bakersfield area. It was then that several residents from a nearby neighborhood, known for its high crime rate, called the police. People thought their district wasn't the best place for such a beautiful and expensive car. They found it suspicious that someone had left a Mustang in a place where various gangs operated and illicit substances were openly distributed. The police, wasting no time, went to the address where the black car had been seen. The vehicle was unlocked, the keys were lying on the floor, There, detectives also found a .38 caliber revolver with 2 spent casings, so they immediately thought this was the murder weapon, although it was quite strange to leave it in the car of the person who had been killed. Forensic examination of the Mustang revealed fingerprints and DNA belonging to Jenny Chance. Her prints were found on the driver's side door and on the gear shift. This wasn't unusual, as Jenny was Todd's wife and could have used his car, but this observation puzzled investigators. Their theory related to car theft didn't fit with the emerging circumstances. What was the point of stealing a Mustang, shooting the driver, only to then abandon the vehicle unlocked and with the keys inside? Detectives took a dirt sample from the floor mat and a swab from the front seat, but all the additional information obtained only disproved their carjacking theory. The black Mustang meant a lot to Todd Chance. It's safe to say it was his 4th child, which he cared for, cherished, and nurtured, and he would never have voluntarily left the car in such a questionable place. Everything pointed to a targeted attack on Todd. Someone clearly wanted him dead. Most likely the perpetrators left Todd's car in this remote area to mislead investigators. The coroner, after conducting an autopsy, described the incident as a planned execution. According to the report, Todd died within 10 minutes, and since the shots were fired from just a few inches away, either wound could have been fatal. Now the authorities had a new theory. The theory was that he was actually shot in his own car, and then the body was dumped in the almond grove. He was already dead when he was left there. After Todd was found, his shoes were spotlessly clean, and the grove was quite dusty. If he had walked through it, his sneakers would have been dusty too. Later that day, police went to the Chance family home to inform Jenny that her husband had been found shot dead. Soon, Todd's 3 daughters and parents also learned this tragic news, and they were all in complete shock. Who needed to take the life of a man uninvolved in any questionable dealings? Todd didn't gamble, didn't use illegal substances. He was a quiet family man who spent all his time with his family. Jessica, Jenny's daughter from her first marriage, said that Todd had been in her life since she was 4 years old. He was her father, her friend, and one of the closest people to her. Jenny herself managed to stay calm and composed during this emotionally turbulent time for their family. She did everything possible to assist the police. She provided phone records, bank statements, and recounted the events of that morning. According to the woman, Todd left the house between 7:30 and 8 a.m. He told his wife he was going to a gun show with his father, Travis. Like his father, Todd was a big fan and collector of firearms. Jenny herself was working at home on the computer that morning while their 2 daughters slept, and the girls also confirmed her words, saying they saw their mom at the laptop around 9:30 or 10 a.m. The police also asked Jenny to check Todd's gun safe and collection to ensure no weapons were missing. Turns out the .38 caliber pistol was missing. His wife said it was unusual for her husband to take a gun with him. Perhaps Todd wanted to sell it or make a trade, considering he was heading to an exhibition where there are always plenty of gun enthusiasts. It appeared that the man was shot with his own revolver, as this .38 caliber model was found in the Mustang. The next step detectives took was to question people who knew the deceased's family, and here strange inconsistencies began to appear in the investigation. Todd's father, Travis, said he had no idea about any gun show. He and his son hadn't seen each other before this and hadn't arranged to go to a gun exhibition. They had no plans to meet that day at all. This was fundamentally different from what Jenny told the police. So either the wife was lying, or Travis was lying, or Todd had lied to his wife about his plans. Now the police had to independently get to the bottom of who was telling the truth. The detectives started by looking into the gun show. It turned out to be real, and indeed taking place that morning in the eastern part of the city. However, Todd's body was found west of Bakersfield, in the completely opposite direction, so it was unlikely he was actually planning to visit the exhibition. The police then checked Todd's mobile phone to get a better understanding of what was happening. They made a surprising discovery. In Todd's phone, they found several explicit photos of his ex-fiancée, a woman named Carrie Williams. Besides the pictures, There were quite flirtatious messages where the former lovers discussed their personal lives, including Jenny. This gave the detectives a new perspective on the situation. They indeed got the impression that the wife was unusually calm and composed when first informed about Todd's death. She clearly didn't resemble a grief-stricken, loving spouse. The peculiarity with the gun show also pointed to an inconsistency in Jenny's story. It appeared that the man wasn't planning to go there, as he ended up in a completely different part of town. His father, Travis, also hadn't arranged with his son about a joint trip that day, and the messages found in Todd's phone potentially indicated his affair with his ex-fiancée. All of this together didn't look very good and could be a motive for the crime. The investigation was clearly not turning out in Jenny's favor. It's possible that Todd lied to his wife about the gun show while actually planning to meet Carrie during that time. His spouse, discovering Todd's correspondence with his ex in his phone, could have guessed about the budding romance and shot her husband in a fit of rage. Todd's relationship with Carrie Williams predated his meeting with Jenny, so the woman might have known about the girl Todd dated before her, and she didn't hesitate to use this information, pointing detectives to Carrie as a potential perpetrator. In reality, Todd and Carrie had ended on very bad terms. It was a rather unpleasant breakup, and they didn't communicate for a long time. The former lovers only reunited in 2012, a year before the tragic incident. The police didn't yet understand what motive Carrie might have had, so they decided to talk to her and find out what connected her to the deceased, besides the explicit photos and correspondence. Firstly, Carrie Williams had an ironclad alibi. During the crime, she was with her daughter at the mission in San Juan Capistrano, which currently functions as a museum. Her whereabouts were documented by a parking ticket. Moreover, the woman explained that they indeed reconnected with Todd after a long time on the internet. They had been communicating for several months, reminiscing about their youth, discussing their personal lives, exchanging photos, but they hadn't met in person once. Todd's first fiancée had to be excluded from the list of suspects. The detectives, having Jenny Chance under suspicion, decided not to accuse someone without concrete evidence, but instead to find irrefutable proof, and their efforts were successful. The investigators found several disturbing signs pointing to the real perpetrator. At the beginning, they had the victim's mobile phone, gun, and car. The forensic examination didn't reveal any foreign fingerprints or DNA traces, so the detectives returned to the place where Todd's car was abandoned. They decided to visit houses on that street and talk to residents, hoping someone noticed something important. The police managed to find several witnesses who saw an unknown middle-aged woman near the car that morning. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap, and large sunglasses concealed her face. The stranger got out of the black Mustang and went somewhere. Besides talking to witnesses, detectives also noticed several surveillance cameras whose footage confirmed that Todd's car was indeed left in that area by a woman. She had a red backpack on her back and a plastic bag in her hands. Initially, there were some disagreements about the gender of the person in the footage. However, comparing the video image with witness descriptions, detectives became convinced it was indeed a woman. The authorities decided to track the stranger by requesting recordings from other cameras along her route. After abandoning Todd's car, the suspect headed to a fast food cafe in the nearest shopping complex. She didn't buy anything but went straight to the restroom. When the woman reappeared on the recordings, she was wearing completely different clothes and shoes. In the plastic bag, detectives could make out something that looked like a yellow container lid. They assumed it was a package of disinfectant wipes that the stranger used to clean the crime scene. After changing, the woman left the cafe without buying anything. A few seconds later, a surveillance camera near the waste containers captured her. She made a quick hand gesture as if throwing something away. At 9:22 a.m., she was spotted in a supermarket where the suspect used a payphone to call a taxi. When she came back into the camera's view, her plastic bag no longer contained the disinfectant wipes. Most likely, they were thrown into the nearest trash bin, as an empty package of wet wipes would hardly have aroused anyone's interest. The next series of surveillance camera footage showed the woman getting into the arrived taxi, and around 10 a.m., The taxi stopped at the Chance residence and dropped someone off. Additional camera recordings were also found, showing Todd Chance's black Mustang heading towards the Almond Grove around 8 a.m., where the body was later found. It's impossible to see who was driving the car in the footage. Then, at about 8:30, the car was driving in the opposite direction. At 8:57, the car was spotted again near the area where it was subsequently abandoned. This happened just when workers discovered Todd's body in the Almond Grove. Although it seemed clear, the problem was that all the surveillance camera footage was of very poor quality, making it difficult to identify the woman. While detectives were almost certain it was Jenny Chance, they had nothing concrete on her except for grainy, slightly blurred images. 4 days after Todd's death, the police called Jenny to the station to retrieve her deceased husband's car. The widow arrived accompanied by her father-in-law, Travis. They were immediately separated into different rooms and interrogated, after which they were shown the surveillance camera footage. Travis didn't recognize the woman in the footage. She didn't remind him of anyone, and the man had no idea who would need to take his son's car only to abandon it in a remote neighborhood. When it was time to question Jenny, she also pretended not to understand who was shown in the video. After talking with the detectives, during which they expressed their suspicions about the perpetrator's identity, Mrs. Jenny refused to answer any more questions and demanded a lawyer. It was at this moment that she was arrested on suspicion of killing her husband, which came as a shock to many people who knew this family. The entire community was divided into two groups. Some were convinced that the wife had shot her own husband. Others insisted that the police had made a mistake. Among those who believed in Jenny's innocence were her 3 daughters. While people discussed law enforcement actions, detectives obtained a warrant to search the Chance family home. They took all the electronics to try to find evidence of Jenny's guilt, but the examination would take time. After reviewing the footage and all other evidence presented by the investigation at that point, the county prosecutor's office refused to press charges against the deceased's wife. The district attorney's office ordered the case to be sent to the sheriff's office for further review. Therefore, after a 5-day detention, Jenny was released from custody. For some reason, they also returned her late husband's car, the black Mustang, to her. Prosecutors understood that due to the poor quality of the surveillance camera recordings and the lack of other evidence, it would be difficult for them to convince a jury of Jenny's guilt. She was released, but she still remained the main and only suspect in this case. The behavior on the footage, the characteristic gait, all pointed to Jenny, but detectives still had many questions that needed clarification. They needed to find evidence and a motive. After all, the Chance family, according to most acquaintances and neighbors, was a happy family that had celebrated their 17th wedding anniversary. They had wonderful children. They had recently returned from a family trip. The couple had been together for many years, and no one had ever seen them seriously argue about anything. Unfortunately, the police really had nothing substantial except video recordings showing the perpetrator. But proving it was Jenny turned out to be problematic, and the case reached a deadlock. However, the detectives were not going to give up. They spent several years searching for additional evidence and trying to build a case against Jenny, and eventually succeeded. During their family vacation in Las Vegas, the Chance family visited a themed crime exhibition based on episodes of a popular TV show in the States. This in itself wasn't cause for suspicion, but it turned out that some of the high-profile criminal case fragments presented there were accurately reproduced in Todd's case. For example, the suspect's use of a payphone. This was done so that the perpetrator couldn't be tracked by their mobile phone. Another fragment talked about changing clothes. A woman took her own husband's life, then completely changed her clothes and shoes to avoid microscopic blood droplets being found on her. She disposed of the old clothes. This is exactly what the perpetrator did in the surveillance footage in Todd's case. It seemed that Jenny used this family vacation as inspiration and training on how she could take her husband's life and get away with it. But this isn't all the information the police managed to gather. In Todd's car, Jenny's fingerprints were found on the driver's door and her DNA on the gear shift. However, the woman insisted that she never drove her husband's car because it had a manual transmission. A legitimate question arose. How then could her prints have been left on the driver's side? Detectives also found surveillance footage showing Jenny in her usual appearance a few weeks before the incident, making a purchase at a supermarket and trying to find out from the salesperson where she could use a payphone. This is strange, since the woman had 2 mobile phones. So for what purpose would she need a payphone? In her first meeting with detectives, Jenny stated that on the morning Todd was shot, she was at home working on her computer while her daughters slept. A check of the Chance family's home computer showed that there was no activity on it until 11 a.m. Consequently, the woman had lied to the police again. In essence, she had enough time to carry out the killing of her husband and return home. The surveillance footage was also shown to Todd and Jenny's daughters. The eldest, Jessica, initially recognized her mother in the footage. The girl stated that they had the same red backpack at home. Although later, when she realized she might inadvertently implicate her mom, Jessica retracted these words. The other 2 daughters, Sarah and Samantha, insisted that Jenny was at home at this time and couldn't have been captured on camera. So all of Todd's children were completely certain that their mom was innocent. Why would she hurt her own daughters by taking away the father they loved? Nevertheless, detectives still believed that Jenny was involved in her husband's death. She probably learned about the affair between Todd and his ex-fiancée, Carrie, and decided to punish her husband in such a cruel way. The second motive, more obvious, was a $500,000 life insurance policy. Since the woman earned significantly more in her managerial position than her husband, in case of divorce, she would have to pay him alimony, so ending the relationship wasn't a suitable option for her. In the end, Jenny managed to receive most of the life insurance policy payout. However, after a lengthy legal battle, everything else went to Todd's parents, Travis and Diana. They, in turn, gave this money to their granddaughters. Finally, after 3 years of trying to build a case and find irrefutable evidence, 49-year-old Leslie Jenny Chams was arrested and charged with killing her own husband. Her trial began in December 2016. On that tragic morning, Jenny and Todd went for a morning drive. Todd was behind the wheel. A woman in a baseball cap and large sunglasses covering her face sat in the passenger seat. They were seen leaving their family home together. While in the car, Jenny pointed a gun at her husband. He, obviously defending himself, instinctively stretched out his right hand. The bullet pierced the skin and muscles of his palm and hit his chest on the right side. Then the enraged wife, in close proximity to her victim, pulled the trigger again. After that, she dragged the lifeless body out of the car and dumped it in the almond grove. Most likely, Jenny didn't expect Todd to be found so quickly. After driving the Mustang to a troubled neighborhood, the woman wiped all surfaces in the car with disinfectant wipes she had brought with her. She left the gun on the floor, the keys on the seat, and simply walked away, hoping no one would notice her. Perhaps she wanted the car to be stolen. This would have further confused the investigation. The only thing Jenny didn't account for was that vigilant residents of the neighborhood would immediately report the abandoned Mustang to the police. Mrs. Jenny's lawyers relied on the alibi provided by her daughters, but Jenny herself initially said that the girls were asleep while she was working on the computer, so the alibi was deemed unconvincing. Real physical evidence that the woman was home that morning could have been her computer, but analysis showed there was no activity on it until 11 a.m. Jenny's own statement in court boiled down to her loving her husband and having no idea about his virtual romance with his ex-fiancée, Carrie Williams. The widow insisted that she was the main breadwinner of the family, so she didn't need Todd's insurance policy. Then Jenny admitted that she had very poor eyesight but never wore contact lenses, only regular glasses. And the stranger in the surveillance footage was wearing sunglasses. If it had been Jenny, she simply wouldn't have been able to see anything. However, prosecutors provided factual evidence that Mrs. Jenny had ordered contact lenses a month before her husband's death, and Jenny was caught in another lie. However, this didn't stop the woman because in her first interview after the trial, She again told reporters about her poor eyesight and lack of contact lenses. After a prolonged court battle lasting 5 weeks on January 31st, 2020, the jury returned a guilty verdict, which came as a huge shock to Jenny and her entire family. She never expected to be found guilty of this crime, and her daughters held the same opinion. The sentence was handed down only in September 2020. The judge sentenced Leslie Jenny Chance to a term of 50 years to life in prison, 25 years for killing her husband Todd Chance, and 25 years for using a firearm. Despite this, the woman still claims her innocence and has given numerous interviews where she tries to convince people that she was wrongfully convicted. Jenny attempted to appeal the verdict in January 2023, but it was upheld. Now she will not be eligible for parole until 2041. Family and acquaintances are still debating whether Jenny is guilty of her husband's death. One of the main points of contention in the case is that no blood traces were found in the car. It seems incredible that the woman could have cleaned the interior so thoroughly while still leaving her fingerprints on the gear shift. The second contentious point was that the authorities did not check what exactly the perpetrator threw into the dumpster, as these items could have become significant evidence in the case. On the other hand, Todd Chance was a simple man who spent all his time with his family. He didn't have vast wealth or real affairs on the side, if you don't count the correspondence with his ex-fiancée. So who really needed to take his life? All individuals are equal. The distinction lies not in birth, but solely in their actions. Inside, we are all the same. Does a woman who earns money by dancing in a strip club have a right to live? Is D'Alembert correct in stating that true equality of citizens consists in their being equally subject to the laws? On February 7th, 2023, an individual was strolling in an area near Flamingo Lakes and Highway 149 in Sam Houston National Forest in Montgomery County, Texas. Unexpectedly, their attention was drawn to a torn garbage bag, from which, according to the witness, human skeletal remains protruded. Shortly after, it was discovered that this was the upper part of a torso. Judging by the size, the body fragment belonged to a young woman. The police immediately had an idea about whose remains were found in the forest. Officers were so confident in their assumptions that even without waiting for the pathologist's conclusion and DNA tests, they contacted the Johnson family to inform them of the discovery. A year earlier, a young woman named Felicia Johnson from San Diego had come to Houston to celebrate her 24th birthday. No one had seen her since. The girl's blood-stained mobile phone and other personal belongings were found in a wooded area, but Felicia herself was nowhere to be found, nor were there any clues indicating her whereabouts. Felicia Marie Johnson, known on social media as Fivia Marie, was the eldest of 3 children. Her parents divorced, and all the kids remained in the care of their father, Kevin. The man struggled to handle the teenagers, so he soon married a woman named Myra. In appearance and character, Felicia was an exact copy of her paternal grandmother. Just as sweet, kind, and smiley. She matured early. Her feminine figure attracted men's attention when Felicia was still a teenager, and as an adult, she decided she could earn good money with her looks. Social media became her personal portfolio. The young woman meticulously cared for her face, hair, and body to appear most presentable in photos. Felicia dreamed of a glamorous life and tried to conform to accepted standards. Long, wavy hair, fluffy lashes, sharply defined eyebrows. She danced and aspired to a modeling career. Unfortunately, while most young girls dream of modeling, only a few achieve this goal. Felicia was in the majority. But despite this, she didn't lose hope and continued to apply to various modeling agencies. The Johnson family lived in San Diego, California. Recently, Felicia celebrated her 24th birthday and decided to treat herself to a trip to Houston, Texas. She wanted the celebration to continue. For any girl, 24 is one of the best ages. You're already of legal age, an adult in charge of your own life, and at the same time, you're still at an age where you can chalk up your mistakes to youth. Felicia spent a long time preparing for her celebratory trip to another city. She got a beautiful manicure, picked out outfits, and packed her things in advance. The young woman decided that if she found work in Houston, she could stay there longer. In general, she had many plans for this small journey, but it ended quite differently from what Felicia Johnson had planned. Her life would come to a halt at this magical number of 24 years. Harris, Houston, the city the young woman had long wanted to visit, a city of new opportunities. Throughout her time there, Felicia kept in touch with her family, friends, and all who loved her. She called for every reason, enthusing about the trip and sharing her impressions. But on Friday, April 15th, 2022, the calls abruptly stopped. The girl wasn't responding to messages, and even more strangely, wasn't appearing on social media. Previously, not a day went by without Favia Marie posting a new photo on her page, especially from a trip to another city. But that evening, there was no word from her. Her loved ones grew worried. Felicia had simply gone silent without explanation. This was an alarming sign, as the girl knew how anxious her father became when she wasn't around, yet she still didn't make contact. She stopped communicating on Friday evening, and by Saturday, when Johnson still hadn't surfaced, her loved ones were gripped by real panic. The family independently hired a private detective. The investigator quickly established the location of Felicia's mobile phone and went to that place to try to find the gadget. It was a park called Bear Creek, a wooded area in Houston, just a few miles from where the girl was allegedly last seen. The phone was found near the park, lying on the roadside and smeared with blood. This discovery certainly didn't inspire confidence that Felicia was all right. The girl's father, Kevin, was in San Diego. As soon as the man realized something had happened to his daughter, he immediately boarded a plane and headed to Houston to find his girl. He couldn't sit at home and wait while his daughter was in danger. First thing, Kevin went to the police and filed a missing person report. In Kevin's opinion, the law enforcement officers initially didn't take the information seriously. As soon as they learned that Felicia was a girl of a different skin color, they accepted the report, but were in no hurry to take any search attempts. The first place they finally decided to search was Bear Creek Park, as that's where the girl's mobile phone was found. It was a doomed endeavor from the start. A vast area, overgrown with forest. Some areas were completely impassable. Roads meandered among the trees, leading in different directions. It was unknown where Felicia might have been heading to or from, or how her phone ended up here. Maybe it was thrown from a car, since it was found near the road. Searching for the girl, possibly not alive, in Bear Creek Park was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The task was complicated by the decision to conduct the operation without attracting outside attention. Detectives supposed that the person responsible for Felicia's disappearance could be a local resident and somehow interfere with the investigation. That's why they wanted to keep people unaware of the search activities. The number of people in the search group sent to Bear Creek was clearly insufficient, and those who were there didn't show much enthusiasm. The organizer of the squad stated that they were almost certain they wouldn't find anyone. Of course, they wished to be wrong in their assumptions, but in the end, Felicia Johnson, neither alive nor dead, was not found in the park area. It was very difficult for the girl's family to accept the first defeat in the search, but Kevin wasn't going to give up. The man declared that he would do everything possible and impossible to get his daughter back home, and he wouldn't rest until that day came. At his initiative, flyers with several photos of Felicia were printed and posted throughout Bear Creek Park, so that anyone passing by would know this girl was being sought. The flyers, besides photos, included a description of the missing person: a dark-skinned Latina, long black hair and brown eyes, about 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighing 68 kilograms, with a tattoo of roses and butterflies on her right shoulder. Local residents and park visitors studied the information on the flyers and indeed joined the search. Now they weren't just walking in the forest, but trying to pay attention to suspicious piles of fallen branches, looking into pits and ravines. The entire local community was searching for the missing girl. Special volunteer groups were created. Eventually, even the FBI got involved in the case. This happened after social activist and leader of the new Black Panther Nation, Quanell X, raised a wave of public indignation, concerned that in Houston over the past 5 months, 4 dark-skinned girls who had been attempted to be involved in the intimate services industry had already gone missing. All 4 were found dead, and in each of these cases, the authorities deliberately delayed the investigation. To the horror of community members, Felicia could become the 5th victim on this list. At a press conference on April 20th, Quanell X called on the Houston community to stand up for Felicia and help investigate her mysterious disappearance. The police began to take some real measures to search for the girl only after the activist's speech. However, despite all the actions taken in this area, the only thing found was Felicia's purse. Now, in addition to the search operation in Bear Creek Park, the police decided to talk to the girl's friends and family, those who knew and loved Felicia, and communicated with her in the days preceding her disappearance. Detectives wanted to create a timeline and see where else they should look. From conversations with these people, it was revealed that Felicia, while in Houston, decided to combine business with pleasure and try to earn some money. The girl told friends in messages that she had found an adult entertainment club called Cover Girls, located in the northwest part of Houston. She had signed up for an interview there as a dancer, but was rejected. After leaving the club, Felicia ordered a taxi to get to the hotel where she had been staying all this time. After the club, her trail went cold. However, this was a very good lead. The Johnson family and social activist Quanell X, who was helping them in the search, believed that Felicia's disappearance was somehow connected to this nightclub. Kevin even suggested that his daughter had somehow gotten into a situation related to human trafficking for intimate services. As practice showed, out-of-town girls were kidnapped and forced to sell their bodies. Kevin had no concrete evidence, but deep down he felt that the strip club had something to do with it. In fact, the man just wanted to believe that his girl was alive, that she had gotten into a difficult situation from which she couldn't get out on her own, and he was ready to find her at all costs. Detectives also adhered to a similar version, as if Felicia had been kidnapped and held against her will. Therefore, they also hoped to find her alive. The authorities assumed that where she was being held there might be a TV or radio. So they asked Kevin Johnson to make a statement and address his daughter. It was a way to talk to her and let her know she was being searched for. Such an appeal could help the girl stay strong and not lose hope. In addition, Kevin Johnson's appearance on TV screens was aimed at reaching out to caring people who had seen or known something but were hiding it from the police. The man said that all friends and loved ones love Felicia, miss her, and mention her daily in their prayers. He asked his daughter not to lose hope for rescue and promised that he would not rest until he brought her home. The father also addressed the kidnappers, stating that the family would never stop, and he personally would begin to hunt for the person holding Felicia captive. In fact, Kevin and his entire family felt that they were the only ones concerned about their daughter's fate. They were sure that the police were not doing their job as they should, because everything that somehow moved the investigation forward was not done by law enforcement officers. The missing girl's mobile phone was found by a private detective. Her purse was discovered by a group of volunteers. Even now, it was not the Houston Police Department addressing the public, but Felicia's father. And this state of affairs caused Kevin even more negative feelings. 2 weeks after Felicia went missing, her family, friends, and concerned individuals who cared about the girl's fate gathered near the city administration, hoping to draw the mayor's attention to Felicia's case and how law enforcement was conducting the investigation. Kevin knew he couldn't handle it alone in a foreign city and called for support from the authorities. He had many questions for the police, but no answers. For example, the distraught father knew that detectives had the opportunity to obtain surveillance camera footage from the nightclub where his daughter was last seen. But for some reason, they either didn't request them or simply didn't want to show them to the Johnson family. It's unknown how successful this action was in attracting the attention of Houston's mayor, but they did manage to pique the interest of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. The woman helped ensure that the police would take this case more seriously. The Congresswoman also promised to obtain surveillance camera footage from the Club for the Family if any existed. Sheila Jackson Lee stated that Felicia came to Houston as a guest, and they were obligated to ensure her safety. Kevin Johnson thought that if he could view the surveillance camera footage from the club, he would understand what happened to his daughter and see who was involved in her disappearance. But everything turned out to be much more complicated than the man thought. The management of the CoverGirls Entertainment nightclub initially told the police that they didn't remember if Felicia Johnson had come for an interview. At least, there was no documentary evidence of this. The girl hadn't filled out a dancer's application or left any statements. Later, it was revealed that the club only had internal surveillance cameras, recordings from which were handed over to detectives. They showed that Felicia did inquire about the vacancy, but the manager refused to hire her, after which she went outside and began calling a taxi. The girl's friends, with whom she had been messaging that day, also reported this to the police. So essentially, these recordings didn't provide any new information. It was only reassuring that the club wasn't involved in her disappearance. The behavior of the nightclub management raised suspicions with the Johnson family because they thought the club wasn't cooperating with the police. Although in reality, this opinion arose due to the lack of communication between the authorities and Felicia's father. The detectives simply didn't think it necessary to inform the missing girl's father about the progress of the investigation. It turned out that the nightclub wasn't the last place Felicia was seen. On April 16th, around 3 a.m., she returned to her hotel room located in the Houston Medical Center, and that's where she was last seen. The police were able to track Felicia's movements and find out what she was doing, who she was communicating with, and where she went after the hotel. After being rejected at the entertainment club, Felicia called a taxi. For some reason, the car was delayed. An unknown man offered to give her a ride to the hotel. After some consideration, she agreed. During the ride, the young people got acquainted and talked. The driver's name was Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. He was 28 years old, and he had come to the States from Nigeria. In reality, this guy grew up in Houston, went to school here in the Fort Bend district, and got a job here. So only his name gave away his Nigerian heritage. After parting, they continued their communication on Snapchat, where they arranged to meet the next morning. According to messages, Chukwuebuka offered the girl $500 for intimate services, and she agreed. After this, no one saw Felicia again. There was no activity on her mobile phone or social media, no credit card transactions. She seemed to vanish from the face of the earth. Now it became clear why the authorities didn't show much enthusiasm in the investigation. The life of an African-American woman who agreed to meet a man for money probably didn't seem valuable in their eyes. How else to explain the police's further actions? Detectives were able to determine that Felicia took a taxi from the hotel, which Chukwuebuka had ordered for her. The car took the girl to a residential complex on Windchase Boulevard, after which the man, in his own car with Felicia, went to his apartment on South Richmond Avenue. An hour later, Chukwuebuka's car was seen leaving the yard, and around the same time, Felicia's phone was pinged on a cell tower near Bear Creek Park, where it was later found. The police believed that night the man disposed of the girl at his home, then got rid of the mobile phone and purse by throwing them in the park area. Apparently, Felicia resisted, as that morning Chukwuebuka was captured on surveillance cameras in a home goods store, and his right hand was bandaged. The footage shows him with a bandaged hand buying garbage bags, gloves, a flashlight, a shovel, an electric kitchen saw, and a towel. This was on April 16th, and on April 17th, he went to a local clinic about a cut. So he didn't dispose of the girl's body immediately, but only after a few days. He dismembered her body to make it easier to hide. After the police found out that Chukwuebuka had ordered a taxi for Felicia Johnson, he became the #1 suspect. Later, detectives were able to view the search queries on his mobile phone, and it was horrifying. The man was searching the internet for how to become a serial maniac, whether bleach can destroy DNA, the most wooded part of Houston, how to avoid punishment for crimes, and more. Also, one of the searches included information on the 15 cheapest places to live for about $1,000. This meant Chukwuebuka was planning to flee in advance. So the attack on the young woman was premeditated, and that woman turned out to be Felicia Johnson. On May 13, 2022, the police had an opportunity to take Chukwuebuka into custody, but they didn't do it. However, after this, the missing person case was changed to a criminal investigation. Even though the body was never found, the authorities believed the girl was dead. This was all very difficult for Felicia's father to accept. He didn't want to acknowledge that his daughter was no longer alive until the very end. Kevin tried his best to keep himself together and not break down. However, the inaction of law enforcement undermined his faith in a favorable outcome of the case. On May 13th, Chukwuebuka was arrested for a traffic violation. This happened a month after Felicia's disappearance. They confiscated his phone and searched his car, after which they released him without charging him with a crime against Felicia. In Chukwuebuka's car, they found a 9mm pistol, cleaning supplies, a whole bunch of latex gloves, a shovel, and the like. Dried bloodstains were found on the back seat and in the trunk, which were taken for analysis. As the authorities explained, they didn't have enough evidence to bring charges against Chukwuebuka, so they simply detained him, interrogated him, and released him. But before that, they took his mobile phone for examination. They also had a warrant to search his apartment, but the suspect wasn't planning to return home. As soon as he was released from the police station, Chukwuebuka disappeared in an unknown direction. Meanwhile, the police examined his mobile phone and searched his apartment, and this investigation revealed the bitter truth. Obvious bloodstains were found in the suspect's apartment. Most of it was on the floor, in the bedroom, and in the hallway. Forensic examination confirmed that the blood belonged to Felicia Johnson. After such a huge blood loss, the probability that the girl would be found alive was, unfortunately, non-existent. Checking Chukwuebuka's mobile phone revealed an even more horrific picture. Photos of several deceased female bodies were found in the gallery. One body was dismembered and photographed. No confirmation that the photo depicted Felicia Johnson was found. However, given the condition in which her remains were found a year later, such a possibility can't be ruled out. No specific information about the bodies in these photos was also revealed. These women were not identified. There was no metadata associated with the images. However, detectives found materials from one case in which Chukwuebuka was accused of harassment. It turns out that a few years earlier, a woman had reported to the police that she was attacked by a man. He tried to force her into sexual intercourse right in his car. By resisting, the woman was able to escape from the car. The assailant tried to chase her, but she managed to hide. So the victim got away with just fear and emotional distress. The attacker's name was Chukwuebuka Nwobodo. The problem was that later she didn't want to cooperate. The woman told the police that everything she had said earlier was untrue and that there had been no violence against her. The complainant, without explanation, said she didn't want to press charges against Chukwuebuka. The police didn't investigate why this happened, but the fact remains. The suspect in Felicia Johnson's death had previous instances of attacking women. The blood of the missing girl in Chukwuebuka's apartment, the photo of a dismembered body on his mobile phone, and other irrefutable evidence surfaced at the moment when the man had already been released without any charges. If law enforcement actions had been more coordinated, the perpetrator would already be behind bars. As soon as the police realized their mistake in releasing Chukwuebuka, they quickly brought charges against him in light of the newly discovered circumstances. This happened in June 2022. He was accused of killing Felicia Johnson, as well as tampering with evidence. Unfortunately, finding him just as quickly wasn't possible. On one hand, this was a real step in the investigation. On the other, the charges against Chukwuebuka destroyed the Johnson family's hopes of finding their daughter alive. They still wanted to believe that the girl had gotten into serious trouble, but that they would be able to see and hug her someday. At that time, social activist Quanell X made a statement to the public, saying that Felicia's case was a warning to all young women, regardless of their skin color, about how quickly their lives could be cut short. She called on people to look around and see if there was anyone in their surroundings who could so easily steal a life like Felicia's. After all, only through joint efforts can this wave of violence against women be stopped. A reward was offered for any information that would lead to Chukwuebuka's arrest. Loved ones managed to collect $5,000 in hopes that someone would report the whereabouts of the criminal suspected of killing Felicia. Vigils were also held in honor of the deceased girl both in San Diego, where she was from, and in Bear Creek Park, where her belongings were found. People prayed and remembered what a wonderful person she was. Witty and cheerful, Felicia had many friends not only on social media but also in real life in California. For most, it was a real shock to learn that their friend had disappeared somewhere in Houston, and they would never laugh at her jokes together again. Many felt a sense of hopelessness and grief. The vigils and prayers were meant to help people cope with their grief, uniting to come to terms with the loss through joint efforts. It was very important for Felicia's family to know that she was loved not only by her close ones, but by many other people as well. They all prayed that the girl would be found soon and buried properly. The Johnson family had to live in a state of constant waiting for a whole year. Felicia disappeared in April 2022, and her remains were only found in February 2023. When the police received a report of human bones found in Sam Houston National Forest, detectives immediately thought it was Felicia Johnson. However, an examination was first needed to identify the body through dental records. But the officers didn't wait and immediately called the girl's father, Kevin, to inform him that they might have found his daughter. This confidence was due to the location where the skeletal remains were found, the degree of decomposition, and some jewelry that remained on Felicia. Despite the fact that it had not yet been confirmed that it was Kevin's daughter who was found, the man took this news as a blessing from above. It was very hard to wake up every day knowing that Felicia was not alive, but it was even harder to know that she wasn't even given a proper burial. Now he could bring her home and lay her to rest as she deserved. This entire situation with the discovery of a body found in the forest proved shocking for local residents. Though it was a wooded area, it was located near residential homes. Upon seeing a crowd of police officers and forensic experts, several service vehicles and yellow tape stretched between trees around a small section of the forest, they immediately realized something extraordinary had occurred. People often went there for walks and never imagined that a few feet away from them, the body of a missing girl who had been searched for throughout the year was buried. Thanks to the efforts of the Johnson family, public activist Quanell X, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, Houston's population knew about this story and sympathized with Felicia's loved ones. Forensic examination confirmed through dental records that these skeletal remains indeed belonged to Felicia Johnson, who had vanished a year ago. Since only the upper part of the girl's torso was found, determining the cause of death wasn't possible. One thing was clear: the demise wasn't natural. It was also unclear what happened to the rest of the body. Either animals had scattered them, or Chukwuebuka had hidden them in different places. It's possible that years later, other fragments might be found, providing additional information on the case. But for the Johnson family, this was already a victory. Felicia's father made a statement saying his daughter had returned to seek justice. He felt relief that he could put an end to this part of the story. The man was glad that his child would soon return home in one form or another. Then, the grief-stricken father, Kevin, issued a chilling warning to the alleged perpetrator, vowing to put his life on the line to find him. These few months during which he waited for answers about what happened to his daughter were a real ordeal. He was overwhelmed with emotions. His health suffered. But now that Felicia would be nearby, he and his family wouldn't rest until they achieved justice for her. As a father, it's very difficult for him to comprehend what happened to his daughter and what she went through. In fact, Kevin Johnson has been battling depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and hypertension for the past year. He couldn't sleep and couldn't come to terms with reality, while the villain who took his daughter away remained unfound and unconvicted. Incredibly, to this day, Chukwuebuka Nwobodo is still on the run. It's possible this monster has committed more than one bloody crime, He's a dangerous individual and could be near someone who hasn't heard about Felicia Johnson's case. The best thing you can do is share this video with friends. Let justice finally prevail and the innocent victims of this criminal be avenged. Kevin Johnson, along with his family, dreams of creating a foundation in Felicia's honor that will help women who have faced forceful involvement in selling their bodies, as this is a global problem. A person's line of work doesn't make them less worthy of life or less deserving of compassion. Felicia Johnson wasn't just a 24-year-old dancer. She was a daughter, sister, friend who deserved to live a long and beautiful life, despite everything.